How love and jealousy led to a tragic end. In this story, we visit the quiet town of Greenwich, Connecticut, where an ordinary morning took a dark turn. It's a tale of mystery, fear, and shocking revelations that unfolded step by step. If you enjoy fascinating Reddit stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button to hear more. Let's dive into this unsettling account and uncover what really happened. One cold morning in February at about 8:15 a.m., a highway maintenance worker named Peter Martinez was doing his usual job checking the roads in Greenwich, Connecticut. While walking along the side of the road near the Glenville neighborhood, he saw something that didn't belong there. About 15 feet from the road's edge sat a large suitcase, bright red with orange stripes. What made it even stranger was how new and clean it looked, especially compared to the usual trash people threw away in that area. When Peter got closer to check it out, he immediately knew something was wrong. As soon as he pulled the zipper open just a little bit, the worst smell he had ever experienced hit him. Years of working on the roads had taught him what different things smelled like, but this was different. It was the unmistakable smell of death. Shaking, he quickly called 911. Within 12 minutes, 3 police cars and a crime scene unit arrived at the scene with their red and blue lights flashing in the morning fog. The Greenwich Police Department's investigation team carefully opened the suitcase, and what they found confirmed their worst fears. Inside was the body of a young woman who they later identified as 24-year-old Valerie Reyes. The police noted several disturbing details. Her legs were tied together at both the knees and ankles with thick white rope, and clear packing tape was wrapped tightly around her wrists. Most horrifying was how her attackers had wrapped several layers of silver duct tape around her mouth and chin, showing that someone had deliberately tried to keep her from calling for help. Valerie's story started much happier. In the friendly community of New Rochelle, New York, born on April 1st, 1994, she grew up in a warm and loving Hispanic family. Every Sunday became a special tradition in the Reyes household. Valerie would arrive early, around 9 a.m., bringing fresh bagels from her favorite local bakery. The whole family would gather in their cozy living room, sharing stories about their week while enjoying coffee and breakfast together. They had different activities planned for each Sunday. Sometimes they would play intense rounds of Monopoly or Scrabble. Valerie usually won. Other times they would pack sandwiches and go hiking in nearby Saxon Woods Park. Once a month, they would try a new restaurant in town, taking turns picking where to eat. Even though Valerie was becoming more independent, she never lost her playful side, especially with her younger brothers. She would help Diego with his math homework by turning it into fun games, and she taught Carlos how to draw cartoon characters, spending hours practicing with him. On rainy weekends, she would organize movie marathons in the basement, complete with homemade popcorn and hot chocolate. Her mom often said that Valerie's laugh could brighten up even the darkest days. To help pay for her art supplies and college books, Valerie got a part-time job at Barnes & Noble in the Eastchester Mall. She worked there for 25 hours each week, usually taking the afternoon shifts from 2 p.m. to 7 p.m. The store manager quickly noticed how good she was with customers and put her in charge of the fiction section. Valerie knew almost every book on those shelves and could always help people find their next favorite story. She started a monthly book club for young readers aged 12 to 15, which grew from just 3 kids to over 20 members in less than 6 months. When she wasn't working or studying, Valerie had many hobbies that kept her busy. She loved singing along to Taylor Swift songs while cleaning her apartment or cooking dinner. 3 times a week, she would wake up early to walk 4 miles around the neighborhood, taking photos of interesting houses and gardens with her phone. She joined a local hiking group that met every other Saturday, and they would explore different trails in the Hudson Valley. During these hikes, she always carried her sketchbook, stopping to draw interesting trees or landscapes they came across. Her biggest dream was to combine her love of art with a career in tattoo design. This interest started because of her older brother, Christian. In April 2018, after a lot of thinking and talking with her mom, Valerie decided to end things with Javier. She met him at a busy Starbucks near the mall and explained that she needed space to focus on herself and her career goals. But Javier didn't take the breakup well at all. Over the next few months, he called her from different phone numbers when she blocked his main number. He sent emails to her work address and even left notes on her car. Between April and August, Valerie counted over 150 attempted contacts from Javier, making her feel scared and overwhelmed. Things got even more complicated in September 2018 when Javier suddenly contacted her about money. He claimed he had accidentally used her debit card information to buy something online for $200 and wanted to pay her back. Valerie couldn't remember ever giving him her card details, but she did remember him using her card once to buy pizza when they were dating, and she was in the bathroom. The whole situation made her uncomfortable. She asked her older brother Christian to handle talking to Javier about the money because she didn't want to deal with him directly anymore. By late 2018, Valerie had moved into a small basement apartment on Sickles Avenue in New Rochelle. Living alone was a big change for her, especially with her anxiety issues. The apartment was pretty basic: one bedroom, a tiny kitchen, and a small living room where she set up her art supplies. But being by herself meant her worries got worse. She started having panic attacks more often, sometimes 2 or 3 times a week. She would call her mom at night when she heard strange noises, and she started sleeping with her bedroom light on. Her family worried about her living alone, but Valerie insisted she needed to learn to be independent, even though it was clearly taking a toll on her mental health. Living alone in her basement apartment was getting harder for Valerie as January 2019 began. That evening, around 9:15 p.m., Valerie sent her last text message to her mom. It read, "Thanks for listening today. I'm feeling a little calmer now. Can't wait to go shopping with you tomorrow. Love you lots." Norma felt slightly relieved, hoping a good night's sleep would help Valerie feel more like herself. They had plans to meet at the Westchester Mall at 2 p.m. the next day to look for a dress for Valerie's upcoming birthday in April. Norma even set a reminder on her phone to leave work early so they'd have plenty of time to shop. She had no way of knowing that this simple shopping trip would never happen and that her daughter's frightening prediction was about to come true in the worst possible way. After texting her mom that Monday night, Valerie called her best friend Jeffrey Anderson, whom she'd known since their first day of high school in 2008. Over their 10 years of friendship, Jeffrey had helped Valerie through many tough times: breakups, family arguments, and especially her anxiety attacks. Their regular Monday night calls had become a tradition over the past year, usually lasting at least 2 hours while they shared stories about their day. That night, Valerie seemed more scared than usual, telling Jeffrey about strange noises she'd been hearing outside her apartment and a feeling that someone was watching her. Jeffrey tried to make her laugh by sharing funny stories about his new puppy, which usually worked to cheer her up. By the end of their 90-minute call around 10:30 p.m., Valerie sounded a bit better. She even made plans with Jeffrey to go see the new Marvel movie that weekend, something she'd been excited about for weeks. Before hanging up, she promised to text him when she got to work the next morning, as she always did. Valerie then got ready for bed, following her usual routine, taking a shower, doing her skincare routine, and reading a few chapters of the new mystery novel she'd borrowed from work. She set her alarm for 6:30 a.m. since she had the opening shift at Barnes & Noble the next day. Tuesday morning arrived with an unusual silence. Norma tried calling Valerie at 8:45 a.m. to confirm their shopping plans for that afternoon, but the call went straight to voicemail. She wasn't too worried at first. Valerie sometimes put her phone on silent during busy morning shifts at the bookstore. Norma sent a quick text. "Hey, sweetie, just checking what time works best for shopping today. Love you." She expected Valerie to respond during her morning break around 10:30 a.m., as she usually did, but no message came. What Norma didn't know yet was that Valerie hadn't shown up for her 7:30 a.m. shift at Barnes & Noble. Sarah Martinez, the store manager, had tried calling Valerie 3 times between 7:45 a.m. and 8:30 a.m. In the 6 months Valerie had worked there, she had never been late, let alone missed a shift without calling. Even when she had the flu 2 months earlier, she had texted Sarah at 5 a.m. to let her know she couldn't come in. The other employees kept checking the back door throughout the morning, expecting Valerie to rush in with an explanation about oversleeping or car trouble, but she never appeared. As Wednesday, January 30th began, alarm bells started ringing for everyone who knew Valerie. She had now missed 2 days of work without any contact. Her phone was still going straight to voicemail, and she hadn't posted anything on Instagram or Facebook since Monday night. Highly unusual for someone who typically shared several stories a day. The bookstore's assistant manager drove by Valerie's apartment during lunch break and noticed her red Toyota Corolla was still in its usual parking spot, covered in a light layer of frost, suggesting it hadn't been moved in at least a day. By Wednesday afternoon, Norma couldn't ignore the terrifying connection between Valerie's frightened phone call on Monday and her sudden disappearance. At 3:45 p.m., she and Sal drove to the New Rochelle Police Department on North Avenue. As they filled out the missing person report, Norma's hands shook so badly she could barely write. She told the officers about Valerie's scary prediction that she was going to die, the recent breakup she'd mentioned, and her increasing anxiety over the past few weeks. The police noticed how unusual it was for a 24-year-old to vanish without taking her car, phone charger, or the anti-anxiety medication they found still sitting on her bathroom counter. They immediately classified it as a high-priority missing persons case. By Wednesday evening, the New Rochelle Police Department launched a full search operation. They put up Valerie's pictures everywhere, on store windows, telephone poles, and social media. The photos showed her warm brown eyes, long black hair, and bright smile. They listed important details. She was 5'3" tall, weighed about 125 pounds, and was last seen wearing black leggings, a green jacket, and white Nike sneakers. The police worked extra fast because 3 other young women had been attacked in nearby towns over the past 4 months. 2 of them had been Hispanic women in their 20s, just like Valerie. Detective Sarah Rodriguez led the team that searched Valerie's apartment at 9:30 p.m. that Wednesday. At first glance, nothing seemed obviously wrong. No broken windows, no kicked-in doors, no overturned furniture. But as they looked closer, using special lights and crime scene tools, they found something worrying. Tiny drops of blood. These weren't immediately visible to the naked eye, but they showed up under the police lights in several places. On Valerie's white pillowcase, around the toilet bowl, and some small spots on the bathroom floor tiles. They took samples of all these blood spots and sent them to the lab for testing. The investigators also made a detailed list of what was missing from the apartment. Valerie's iPhone X with its distinctive red case was gone, along with her rose gold iPad that she used for drawing, her black leather wallet containing her driver's license, credit cards, and about $200 in cash was also missing. Strangely, some of her clothes were gone too, specifically a white sweater she wore often and her favorite pair of jeans. Most puzzling was the missing small decorative pillow from her couch, a purple one with silver stars that her mom had given her for Christmas. The fact that these specific items were missing made some detectives think Valerie might have packed a bag and left on her own. Some officers suggested that maybe Valerie had gotten mixed up in something dangerous and needed to hide, or perhaps she had run away with someone. They pointed to cases they'd seen before where young people disappeared voluntarily, usually because of debt problems or relationship issues. But Sal and Norma strongly disagreed with this theory. They explained how Valerie had just bought a new set of art supplies for $180 that she was excited to use, had scheduled dentist and doctor appointments for the following week, and had even prepaid her rent through March. Most importantly, she had plans to host a family dinner that weekend. When Norma told the detectives about Valerie's frightening phone call from Monday, they started taking the case even more seriously. She described how Valerie had been shaking with fear, convinced that someone was planning to hurt her. Detective Rodriguez asked for specific details about what Valerie had said. "I'm going to die. Someone is going to kill me, I can feel it." The police wanted to know if Valerie had mentioned any specific threats or named anyone who might want to harm her. But Norma explained that Valerie seemed afraid of something she couldn't quite explain, more like a terrible feeling than a specific threat. Norma couldn't stop thinking about that last phone call. She kept remembering little details that now seemed important. How Valerie's voice cracked when she talked, the sound of her pacing back and forth in her apartment, the way she whispered sometimes as if afraid someone might hear her. Norma had thought Valerie was just upset about breaking up with the guy she'd been seeing, combined with her usual anxiety. She had seen Valerie go through breakups before, and while they were always hard, she had never reacted with such intense fear. Now Norma wondered if there was something or someone that Valerie had been too scared to tell her about, and this thought kept her awake at night, replaying every conversation they'd had over the past few weeks, looking for clues she might have missed. The police first looked closely at the man Valerie had recently broken up with, thinking he might know something about her disappearance, but they quickly ruled him out as a suspect when they found he had a solid alibi. Security camera footage showed him working his night shift at a local hospital during the time Valerie went missing. He seemed genuinely worried about Valerie, joining search parties and putting up missing person posters around town. He even used his own money to print 1,000 flyers with Valerie's photo and distributed them at train stations and shopping centers. Valerie's family turned to Facebook and Instagram for help, sharing her photos and story everywhere they could. Her brother Christian made a special Facebook page called Find Valerie Reyes that got over 15,000 followers in just 2 days. People from all over New York started calling and messaging with tips about where they thought they'd seen Valerie. One of her high school friends, Maria Santos, was sure she'd spotted Valerie at the New Rochelle train station on Tuesday morning wearing her favorite dark green winter coat and black jeans. Maria said Valerie had been walking quickly and looking down at her phone, but she wasn't completely sure it was her since the person was wearing a hood. More possible sightings started coming in from everywhere. A bartender in Manhattan said someone looking like Valerie had ordered a coffee at his cafe on Wednesday afternoon. A taxi driver thought he'd picked her up near Times Square. Someone else claimed they saw her shopping at Target in White Plains. The police checked every single tip. They interviewed witnesses, looked at security cameras, and sent officers to each location. But none of these sightings turned out to be Valerie. Each dead end made her family more worried, especially when they learned that Valerie's phone was still turned off and hadn't connected to any cell towers since Monday night. On Thursday afternoon, Detective Rodriguez made an alarming discovery while checking Valerie's bank records. Someone had withdrawn money from her account multiple times, taking out a total of $10,250 from different ATMs around New Rochelle. What made this especially strange was that Valerie never took out more than $100 at a time, and she preferred using her credit card for most purchases. The withdrawals started early Tuesday morning with $500 taken out at 2:05 a.m. from an ATM near the train station, followed by more withdrawals every few hours. By Wednesday night, her account was almost empty. The police immediately asked all the banks for their security camera videos. It took them nearly 24 hours to collect and watch all the footage. They had to check 12 different ATMs across the city. Finally, around 8:30 a.m. on Thursday, January 30th, they found something important. A camera at the Chase Bank on Main Street had captured someone using Valerie's card at 2:05 a.m. on Tuesday. The video showed a person wearing a dark winter coat and hood, about the same height as Valerie. They moved quickly, keeping their head down and face turned away from the camera. When the police showed the ATM footage to Norma, she spent a long time studying it. The person in the video was the same height and build as her daughter, and they were wearing a coat that looked like Valerie's, but something felt off to Norma. The way the person moved didn't seem like Valerie's usual quick, bouncy walk. Still, this was the first real clue they had. So the police released the images to local news stations and newspapers. They asked anyone who might have been near that Chase Bank early Tuesday morning to contact them with information. They also started checking other security cameras in the area, hoping to see which direction the person went after using the ATM. The reward for information about Valerie's whereabouts was increased to $25,000, with her family and the Greenwich Police Department each contributing half of the money. Days went by without any news about Valerie. Her pictures were everywhere. On social media, street corners, and local news, but no one seemed to have any helpful information. The police searched day and night, while her family waited anxiously by the phone, hoping for any news about their loved one. As one week turned into another, their hopes began to fade, though they never stopped believing they would find her. On a cold morning in February 2019, everything changed. A group of road workers were fixing potholes near a quiet wooded area in Greenwich, Connecticut, about 10 miles from where Valerie lived. As they worked, one of them spotted something unusual, a bright red-orange suitcase sitting among the trees. It looked new and clean, which seemed strange for something left in the woods. The workers felt something wasn't right about the suitcase. After talking it over, one of them walked closer to check it out. When he opened the zipper, he jumped back immediately, overwhelmed by a terrible smell. He quickly called his coworkers, who contacted the police. Within minutes, police cars and investigators filled the quiet road, their lights flashing through the trees. What they found inside the suitcase was heartbreaking. There was a young woman's body, clearly the victim of a violent crime. Her shirt was open and she wasn't wearing any shoes. The killer had tied. When his bosses at the Department of Public Works found out what he had done, they were horrified. They immediately told him to stop coming to work and started looking into everything he had done. They also said sorry to Valerie's family, but they knew that words couldn't fix the hurt their worker had caused. The family was already struggling with losing Valerie. Now they had to deal with someone trying to profit from their tragedy. Meanwhile, the police weren't letting anything slow down their search for whoever had killed Valerie. The police kept digging into every detail they could find, especially looking at how Valerie's bank account had been used after she disappeared. They found something important. Someone had taken money from her account very early in the morning on January 29th, just a few hours after she had last talked to her mom on the phone. The police looked at the security camera video from the ATM and saw a man wearing all black clothes with a hood covering his face. Even though they couldn't see his face clearly, they noticed something else very useful. They could see the license plate on his car. This discovery led to an important breakthrough in the case. The police tracked down where the car came from and found out it was a Honda that someone had rented for just 2 days, January 28th and 29th. But what they learned next shocked everyone involved in the investigation. The person who had rented the car wasn't a stranger. It was Javier Enrique de la Rosa, Valerie's former boyfriend. This discovery changed everything about the investigation, turning their attention to someone Valerie had once trusted and cared for. The police were shocked when they looked deeper into Valerie's bank records. After she disappeared, someone had taken out more than $10,000 from her account, and that's after settling in Flushing, New York. Javier tried to build a simple life for himself. He worked whatever jobs he could find, first cleaning buildings, then making coffee at a coffee shop, and eventually cooking and serving food at a fast food place. He was careful not to draw attention to himself, knowing that one wrong move could get him sent back to Venezuela. He lived simply and quietly, moving from place to place, never staying too long in one spot. Most people who met him thought he was just another hardworking immigrant trying to make it in America. The people who knew Javier during this time always said good things about him. His friends talked about how he would help anyone who needed it, how he showed up when people needed him, and how he seemed like such a nice, caring person. He was the kind of friend who would give you a ride when your car broke down or help you move to a new apartment without complaining. Nobody saw anything strange or worrying about him. He just seemed like a regular guy trying to make his way in the world. Everything changed for Javier in January 2018 when he met Valerie Reyes online. From the first message they exchanged on the dating website, Javier felt something special. He fell hard for Valerie and didn't try to hide it. Every day, he would post something new on Facebook or Instagram about how amazing she was. He would write long messages about love and destiny, sharing his feelings with anyone who would listen. He spent hours picking out perfect gifts for her and planning special dates, trying to show her just how much she meant to him. But while Javier was falling deeper in love, Valerie wasn't feeling the same way. She liked him and enjoyed spending time with him, but she wasn't ready for everything he wanted. When they met in person, Javier started talking about their future together. He wanted them to find an apartment, move in together, and start building a life as a couple. He had their whole future planned out in his head. But all this talk about commitment and family life made Valerie uncomfortable. The more Javier pushed for a serious relationship, the more she pulled away. She started feeling overwhelmed by his constant attention and big plans for their future together. Right from the start of their relationship, Valerie could see that she and Javier wanted very different things. She was young and had big dreams for herself. She wanted to travel, focus on her job, and figure out who she was as a person. But Javier had already decided that Valerie was the one for him, and he wouldn't take no for an answer. When she tried to create some space between them, he just tried harder to stay in her life. He would call her phone over and over, sometimes 10 or 20 times a day. When she didn't answer his calls, he would send dozens of text messages begging her to talk to him or just asking why she was ignoring him. Eventually, Valerie felt like she had no choice but to block Javier's number on her phone. She also blocked him on Facebook, Instagram, and every other social media platform she used. She thought this would finally give her some peace, but Javier always found new ways to reach her. He would use different phone numbers, create new social media accounts, or even try to send messages through their mutual friends. It seemed like nothing could stop him from trying to talk to her. It was as if he was obsessed with keeping her in his life, no matter how clearly she told him she wanted to be left alone. Valerie's mother, Norma, had known about Javier from the beginning, and she never felt good about him. She could see things in him that worried her, the way he always needed to know where Valerie was, how he would try to make all of Valerie's decisions for her, and the tricks he would use to get his way. The worst example of his manipulation happened when he made up a completely fake story about his mother dying from cancer. He thought that if Valerie felt sorry for him, she might agree to see him again. This lie showed everyone just how far he would go to try to keep Valerie in his life. Even though Valerie and Javier had only dated for a few months, he spent more than a year trying to get back together with her. He just couldn't accept that their relationship was over. Every time Valerie thought she was finally free of him, he would come up with a new reason why they needed to talk. Sometimes he would pretend he just wanted to be friends. Other times he would act like he needed her help with something important. But it was always just another trick to try to see her again. The last time anyone knew about Javier trying to contact Valerie was in September 2018. He sent her a message saying there was a problem with her debit card and that he needed to talk to her about it. After that, he seemed to vanish from her life completely. For the first time in over a year, Valerie didn't have to worry about getting unexpected messages or calls from him. She probably felt relieved, thinking he had finally moved on with his life and would leave her alone. But on February 11, 2019, everything changed when the police showed up at Javier's apartment in Flushing, New York, to arrest him. When the police started asking him questions, Javier couldn't keep his story straight. He tried telling them that he had just happened to find Valerie's wallet lying on a street in Manhattan. According to his story, the wallet had her debit cards in it, and there was even a piece of paper with her PIN number written down. He kept insisting that he hadn't seen Valerie in more than a year and had nothing to do with her disappearance. But the police could see that his story didn't make any sense, and they knew he was lying to them. When the police showed Javier evidence that they knew he had rented a car and driven it near Valerie's home, he couldn't stick to his first story anymore. At first, he tried saying that yes, he had been near her apartment, but he hadn't seen her or talked to her. But the police had more evidence to show him. When they put the pictures of Valerie's body in the suitcase on the table in front of him, Javier finally started talking, though his new story still wasn't the whole truth. This time, Javier told a different story about what happened on January 28th. He said that he had gone to see Valerie that evening, and surprisingly, she had welcomed him in. According to Javier, they started getting romantic, like all the bad feelings between them had just disappeared. He claimed they were so caught up in the moment that they accidentally fell off her bed together. In his version of events, Valerie hit her head hard on the floor when they fell. He said she stopped moving after that, and he got scared about what might happen next. Javier went on to describe what he did next, though his explanation for his actions made little sense. He said he was worried that if Valerie woke up, she might scream, so he wrapped tape around her mouth to keep her quiet. Then he tied up her hands and feet, which he couldn't really explain why he needed to do. After that, he said he panicked and decided to put her body in a suitcase. He drove to a wooded area far from her home and left her there. The way he told it, everything that happened was just one accident after another. And he had just made bad choices because he was scared. But when the police talked to everyone who knew Valerie, they heard a very different story. All of Valerie's friends and family members said the same thing. There was no way she would have invited Javier into her home or wanted to be romantic with him. They explained how Valerie had told everyone she knew that she wanted nothing to do with Javier anymore. She had been very clear about this. She didn't want to see him, talk to him, or have any contact with him at all. The idea that she would suddenly change her mind and welcome him into her home just didn't make any sense. The medical examiner's report told an even darker story that completely went against what Javier had said. The report showed that Valerie hadn't died from hitting her head. She had died from not being able to breathe inside the suitcase. The tape that Javier had wrapped around her face had been put on so tightly that she couldn't get any air. This raised serious questions about Javier's story about panicking and acting without thinking. If he had really been scared and acting randomly, why did he take the time to tie her up so carefully? Why did he wrap tape around her face multiple times? And if this was all just a terrible accident, why did he keep using her bank cards to take out money for days after she died? When the police asked him about using Valerie's bank cards, Javier came up with another strange explanation. He claimed that he had actually wanted to get caught by the police. According to him, that's why he didn't try to hide his face from the security cameras at the ATM machines when he was taking out money. He told them that after everything that happened with Valerie, he felt so guilty that he wanted to be punished. He said he couldn't live with himself after what he had done, and he was trying to leave clues so the police would find him. But, like his other stories, this one also seemed more like an excuse than the truth, especially since he had tried so hard at first to convince everyone he hadn't done anything wrong. The police had trouble believing Javier's story about wanting to get caught. They wondered why, if he felt so guilty, he didn't just walk into a police station and tell them what he had done. Instead, he had tried to hide what happened and only started talking when they showed him proof they already had. They also knew about Valerie's scared phone call to her mom right before she disappeared, where she said she felt someone was going to hurt her. This made it hard to believe she would have invited Javier into her home or wanted to be close to him that night. The injuries on Valerie's body told a different story, too. The medical examiner found many bruises and broken bones that couldn't have happened just from falling off a bed like Javier claimed. Her face was badly beaten, and she had other injuries that showed someone had attacked her violently. The police knew they were dealing with something much worse than an accident, but they still couldn't figure out exactly why Javier had done such terrible things to someone he claimed to love. As they dug deeper into the case, the police found something interesting. Just a few days before Valerie disappeared, Javier had sent a text message to his new girlfriend telling her a strange story. He said he had caught his ex-girlfriend, meaning Valerie, in bed with one of his neighbors. But the police knew this wasn't true. Valerie would never have gone to Javier's place willingly, and she hadn't been anywhere near his home. They realized Javier was making up stories, maybe to make his new girlfriend feel sorry for him or to justify his angry feelings toward Valerie. The police had another theory about why Javier might have hurt Valerie. They thought he might have found out that Valerie was starting to date someone new. They knew from talking to Valerie's friends that Javier had always acted like he owned Valerie, even after they broke up. He couldn't stand the idea of her being with anyone else. The thought of Valerie moving on with her life and finding happiness with someone new probably made him extremely angry. Like many people who hurt their ex-partners, Javier seemed to think that if he couldn't have Valerie, nobody else should either. Looking at all the evidence, the police could piece together what probably happened on that terrible night of January 28, 2019. First, Javier went to a car rental place in Flushing and rented a Honda. Then he drove all the way to New Rochelle, where Valerie lived. He got there very early in the morning on January 29th, parking his car somewhere near her apartment building. He was careful to put his phone on airplane mode so nobody could track where he was. But even though he tried to hide his movements, the cell phone towers had already recorded that his phone was very close to Valerie's apartment before the signal disappeared. The police found more evidence that showed what really happened inside Valerie's apartment. They found Javier's DNA in several places, on Valerie's body and under her fingernails where she had tried to fight back. While Javier tried to say everything that happened between them that night was romantic and willing, the evidence showed something completely different. The scratches, the bruises, and all the other signs pointed to Valerie fighting hard to protect herself from someone who was attacking her. Instead of the peaceful encounter Javier described, the evidence showed there had been a violent struggle where Valerie had desperately tried to defend herself. Everyone who knew Valerie kept telling the police the same thing. She wanted nothing to do with Javier anymore. The evidence found on her body showed that she had fought hard against someone who was attacking her. She had scratches and bruises all over. Her nose was broken, and she had a very bad injury to her head. All of these injuries told the story of someone who had desperately tried to fight off an attacker who was much stronger than her. This was nothing like the accident that Javier had described, so it was clear that someone had violently attacked Valerie. What Javier did next was especially cruel. After hurting Valerie so badly that she passed out, he didn't try to help her or call for help. Instead, he wrapped tape around her face many times, making it impossible for her to breathe properly. Then he tied up her hands and legs so she couldn't move. The suitcase he put her in wasn't just any suitcase. It was one they had bought together when they were dating, planning for a vacation they never took. This made his actions even more horrible, using something that was supposed to hold happy memories to commit such a terrible crime. The worst part was that Valerie was still alive when Javier put her in the suitcase and closed it. She died within minutes because she couldn't breathe. The tape around her mouth and her broken nose made it impossible to get enough air. But Javier didn't stop there. He showed how carefully he had planned everything by what he did next. Instead of showing any concern for Valerie, he focused on trying to hide what he had done. After putting the suitcase with Valerie inside it into his rental car, Javier went back to her apartment. He spent time cleaning everything very carefully so the police wouldn't find any evidence of what he had done there. He even used Valerie's own finger to unlock her phone while she was unconscious, going through all her messages to see who she had been talking to and if she had been dating anyone new. He also looked for her banking information, planning to steal her money. Javier then drove to a quiet, wooded area in Greenwich, Connecticut. He picked a spot along the highway where trees would hide the suitcase from view and left it there. Nobody knows for sure if Javier realized Valerie was already dead by this point, but it was clear he didn't care whether she lived or died. His actions showed he was only thinking about himself and how to avoid getting caught. On his drive back home to Flushing, he stopped at several ATMs to take money out of Valerie's bank accounts using her cards and the information he had stolen. To try to cover up what he had done, Javier started getting rid of evidence. He threw Valerie's phone into a river from a bridge, probably hoping it would never be found. He also took her iPad and one of her pillows from her apartment in a move that showed how little he cared about what he had done. He later traded her iPad for a new computer monitor, acting like it was just another normal day. While Valerie's family was desperately searching for her, Javier was calmly going about his life, even using the things he had stolen from her to get something new for himself. After everything Javier had done, he showed no sign of feeling bad about his actions. When the police finally arrested him on February 12, 2019, they charged him with kidnapping that led to death. This was a very serious charge that could result in either the death penalty or spending the rest of his life in prison. The case didn't go to trial right away, though. During this time, Javier's lawyers worked hard to try to keep him from getting the death penalty. They tried to make people feel sorry for him instead of seeing him as someone who had committed a terrible crime. His lawyers came up with several arguments to try to help him. They kept pointing out that he had never been in trouble with the law before this crime. They talked about how he had come to America as a refugee from Venezuela, leaving his family behind. According to them, being away from his loved ones had made him very sad and depressed. They wanted everyone to see Javier as someone who had made one terrible mistake because he was jealous and heartbroken, not as a dangerous criminal who had carefully planned to hurt someone. On February 5th, 2020, about a year after he was arrested, Javier finally admitted to what he had done. He stood up in court and pleaded guilty to kidnapping Valerie and causing her death. When he spoke to the court, he tried to show that he was truly sorry for what he had done. He said he would never be able to forgive himself for hurting Valerie. He even said he wouldn't ask Valerie's family to forgive him because he knew he didn't deserve their forgiveness after what he had done to their daughter. One of the most emotional moments in court came when Valerie's mother, Norma, spoke about losing her daughter. She told everyone about the terrible pain of having her child taken away from her in such a cruel way. She talked about all the dreams and hopes Valerie had and how all of those possibilities were gone forever because of what Javier had done. While Norma was speaking, Javier started crying quietly in his seat. Whether these were real tears of regret or just another way of trying to get sympathy, only he knew for sure. The case finally ended on September 23rd, 2021, when the judge gave Javier his sentence. He was 26 years old when he was sentenced to spend 30 years in prison for kidnapping Valerie and causing her death. The judge also made it clear that because Javier had been living in America without proper papers, he wouldn't be allowed to stay in the country after serving his time in prison. As soon as his 30 years are finished, he will be sent back to Venezuela, the country he had tried so hard to leave behind. This meant that not only would he lose 30 years of his life in prison, but he would also lose his chance to stay in America, the country where he had hoped to build a better life for himself. This story reminds us of how hidden struggles and ignored warning signs can lead to unimaginable outcomes. It's a chilling example of how obsession and unresolved emotions can spiral into something far darker. If you enjoyed this Reddit story, make sure to subscribe, like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support means we can continue sharing more stories like this. Stay curious, stay safe, and we'll catch you in the next one.